All right. Welcome back to the Picking Your Brain podcast, where we interview people doing ministry at a high level. And on today's episode, we are lucky to have Dr. Richard Ross. What's up, Dr. Ross?
Wonderful to be with you. Absolutely.
Man, I'm so excited to have you on. I'm kicking off season 3 now. We've had a great first 2 seasons, but I could have only dreamed to have someone like you on the podcast. In my mind, if there was a Mount Rushmore of student ministry, you are easily on that Mount Rushmore. And so I'm just so thankful you were willing to give up some time to be here today.
Now, by saying Mount Rushmore, are you saying I remind you of someone who's been stoned? Is that what you're saying?
No, sir. Just the GOATs, the greatest student pastors, or people that's had the greatest impact on student ministry. I think if that's you. You're awesome.
No, you're thinking everybody on Mount Rushmore has been dead 100 years, and Ross is so close to joining them. Why don't we just put him on the mountain? I know that's what you're thinking.
No, sir, but that's good. Well, Dr. Ross, if there's some reason, if somebody doesn't know who you are, will you just kind of share who you are, where God has you serving right now, and all those things?
Well, my dad was in the Battle of the Bulge, saving the world from the Nazis. And while he was in the foxhole, he got a call to preach. So he survived the war and came to Southwestern Seminary to prepare to become a pastor, married my mom, and I guess he was not doing papers every single night because I showed up really quickly. So I was actually born while my folks were right here at Southwestern where I teach today. So my dad did indeed preach out in West Texas, and I grew up loving Jesus out there, being in the churches that he pastored. Gave my heart to Jesus, felt a call to ministry. We'll talk more about that later. But as far as preparing for ministry, when I went off to college, I was 19. God clearly said, I want you to be a student minister. That came out of nowhere for me. Served that summer as a summer student minister, got back to school, and instantly a church said, well, we want you to start Sunday being our student minister. Long story short, I continued serving through college and then came to Dallas to be a youth pastor and also go to Southwestern Seminary. I stayed in that church as youth pastor 12 years through master's program, PhD degree, and even years after that. Thought I would stay in that church the rest of my life and retire as their student minister, but God grabbed me by the neck in 2000. Well, in 1984, and said, I want you to go to Nashville. I want you to train and speak to youth pastors. So I did that. But the whole 16 years I was in Nashville, by the grace of God, I still got to be a youth pastor, so-called part-time, but I got to be a student pastor. Then in 2000, God clearly brought me to Southwestern Seminary to teach the next generation of student pastors. And even though I am well past retirement age, I'm still teaching all of the student ministry here. Have a marvelous time in class with guys and girls that have a heart for Jesus and a heart for teenagers. Still volunteering and helping with youth ministry in my own church as a volunteer. And I think I'll go to hospice. Still trying to figure out how do we raise up a young generation to accomplish the Great Commission for the glory of God. That pretty much is the vocational story of my life. The more important story is while I was in college, I fell head over heels in love with Lawana, the campus queen. Thank you very much. We have been married as of last week, 51 years, wow. Mostly doing youth ministry hand in hand. Thought we would have a house full of kids of our own, had lots of trouble making babies. But after 16 years, Clayton has come to our home. He is an absolutely beautiful young man, strong heart for Jesus, mushrooming gifts and abilities. So we're having fun watching where God is going to take him as well. That pretty well would be the story right there.
That's awesome. I didn't know some of those. That's really cool. I went to New Orleans Seminary, so I wasn't blessed to have you, to do student ministry classes, but I've even talked to people that went to Southwestern that didn't do anything with student ministry, but they took student ministry classes just to be in class with you. That's what I've always heard. They said that you were just incredible. You and Dr. Derwin were just just killing it in student ministry. And so I've heard nothing but good things about y'all over there.
Well, you're so kind. I do have a question. I'm just
Yeah.
needing information. Is New Orleans Seminary accredited yet? I was just curious about that.
I think so.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just teasing.
And I just graduated from there too with my second degree. So it was a good school. I'm thankful for New Orleans.
You bet. We love New Orleans. Wonderful professors. David Odom, that teaches student ministry, was one of my students here. And anyway, I just love New Orleans. It is the seminary surrounded by the best restaurants in the United States. So that's all good.
That's true. That's true. Well, Dr. Ross, the format of the podcast is super simple. I'm just going to ask you a few questions as a minister and how you think about ministry so we can all learn from you today. And the first question I want to start with is, how would you suggest a ministry leader cultivate a deep and meaningful prayer life? And what has maybe worked for you as you've gone through your spiritual life? I'm sure that's maybe changed and developed throughout the years, but what have you said, and what would you say to young youth ministers? How would they cultivate a deep prayer life?
Incredible question. In fact, it's brilliant that you would ask that first, because that prayer life, that is the foundation for everything else. And I know that sounds like a religious cliche, but it's not a religious cliche. It's the absolute truth. First suggestion I would make to those watching the podcast today is, I think you just get before Jesus and you clearly ask him, what would please you? How much time would you like for me to be before you every morning of my life? Legalism is human beings telling human beings what they ought to do. I reject that. I think you just go to Jesus and say, listen, you died on the cross to redeem me into a relationship, into a conversational relationship. If that's the whole point of this, then surely, King Jesus, you've got an opinion about how much time you would like for the two of us to get together. And I think you just listen to him. And whatever he says to you, whatever he says, okay, for now, I would like for you to be before me, XYZ. Then I think you just make a heartfelt, deep, serious decision. Then that's the way it's going to be. I don't care what else is going on in my life. That is going to be the way it's going to be. Once again, no smack of legalism here, because it's not human driven. This is just something you and Jesus have worked out together. Now, most people would say, okay, I've got this prayer thing that I do in the morning. Probably not quite as rich as it ought to be, but it's the best I can do, because even with that, I'm just barely making it to the church on time, or whatever else obligation my day begins with. So many people would say, okay, if Jesus gives me a more expansive time to be before him and I'm barely making it out the door, what gives? Well, I'll tell you exactly what gives. You change your getting up time. That is the simple solution. Now, does Jesus want you ruining your health, killing your immune system, all kinds of other things because of inadequate sleep? Well, sometimes, of course, to accomplish a spiritual goal, but he wouldn't desire that for the long term. So if you're going to get up earlier and you're not going to harm your health, then the only other solution is you go to bed earlier. Adult habits die hard. And I would say even in your 20s, adult habits die hard. And what you have to just decide is, if my time with Jesus is going to be the foundation for every other part of my ministry, and if I'm not going to tell him a story, if I'm going to tell him the truth about how much time I'll be before him every morning, then I'm willing to move mountains to make that happen, which includes shifting my biology a little bit. So I think you just do that. Some people will say, well, that's impossible. My schedule would never permit me to get in bed earlier. I push back on that. You just start examining what you're doing in entertainment. You start examining what you're doing streaming. You start examining what you're doing gaming. You start examining what you're doing scrolling, which is the biggest issue right now. And what you discover is, there were minutes in all of that where I could have shut things down and gone to bed. Now,
Hmm.
first few nights, maybe it's a little bit harder to fall asleep and whatnot. But if you're getting up earlier, what I've discovered is your body gets tired and
Yeah.
eventually you start wishing you could go to sleep earlier. So I just think you do it. I don't think you think about it. I don't think you say to yourself, well, someday I probably ought to. You just do it. And then what I've discovered is once that time frame is set in your mind, okay, this is what I'm going to do, then you just relax because you don't have to rush because you
Hmm.
already know I'm going to sit in this chair right here for those minutes. Once you do that, it's relaxing. I probably have a little bit of a type A in me. I like getting things done. I move through the day really carefully. My tendency always was, I wonder if there's a way to do this more efficiently. I wonder if there's a way to cut a little corner here.
Hmm.
But now that I have this time frame set, I don't do that anymore. I just enjoy the scripture. I just enjoy my time with Jesus. When I'm trying to explain this to a group of youth ministers, sometimes I'll say, okay, it's a little bit like our wives or
Yeah.
girls, they like, if they've got some free time, they like to put a tub full of hot water and pour bubbly things in there and maybe lean their
Hmm.
head back against a towel and maybe even light a candle. They say that's luxurious. Okay, I
Hmm.
think prayer can be that. I think it can be luxurious in that I'm just soaking up and I'm just enjoying this. So I think setting that in place then frees you to give attention to the actual flow of prayer. I wanted to say all of that first because when I'm
Yeah.
talking to you about talking through a flow of prayer, uh, that won't make sense to people if they can't imagine that I would actually have time to do those things.
Hmm.
There is nothing in the New Testament, of course, that says you need to pray according to an outline that has the initials ACTS. Nothing necessarily biblical about that. I do think there's some biblical rationale for that, and I think
Hmm.
it's just an easy way to remember a flow for
For
prayer.
sure.
So I've been using that for a long, long time. Uh, I do want to say a few words about adoration, the beginning part.
Hmm.
My experience has been that is the weakest part of most people's prayers.
Yeah. I
Most
agree.
people, if they think I'm doing praise and adoration, what they're really doing is thanksgiving. Lord Jesus, I praise you for my wonderful family. Lord Jesus, I thank you. I praise you for the great church that I serve.
Hmm.
Here's the distinction. Praise is declaring glory for who Jesus is. Thanksgiving is focusing on what he has done. That is a sharp distinction.
Hmm.
In praise and adoration, you're telling him all the ways he is wonderful, all the qualities, all the characteristics, all the attributes. And if you don't know how to do that, training wheels on your bicycle might be you just go through the book of Psalms quickly and you just stick post-it notes where
Hmm.
there are some Psalms of praise, and the training wheels on your bicycle might be I read those out loud, and that's just my way of declaring glory to God. After a while, you take the training wheels off and you're off and running. Uh, if you're shifting your waking up time, one very practical issue is getting sleepy. And so, in
Hmm.
the initial part of your prayer, that would probably be where you would tend to kind of get a little sleepy. Your mind wanders a little bit. It took me years to figure this out, but there is an easy solution to being sleepy or your mind drifting off on other subjects. This will sound silly, but it works. If you move your lips while you pray, it is impossible to be sleepy. If you don't
Yeah.
believe me, just try it. You
Yeah.
can't get sleepy if your mouth's moving. So I know that would feel silly if you were in a room full of other people, but we're talking about closet prayer in the morning by yourself. So if you're by yourself, don't be embarrassed. Just move your lips. And what you're going to discover is you stay really focused. Now, once again, you're not going to believe this unless you try it. Set your phone to ding in 2 minutes. Just set a 2 minute timer, and begin praying prayers of adoration, but moving your lips where your mind's not drifting. You're going to be amazed how hard it is to pray for 2 minutes in that way. And that may say to you, okay, I got to grow in this area. Man, I've got to do much better telling the king how great he is. Confession, we all understand that, agreeing that sin is sin. We teach it to the young people. Thanksgiving, the only thing I would say there is thank Jesus first for what he's doing in his kingdom. The problem is we Americans always make our faith about us. So our tendency is, I'm going to start with all this stuff I'm thankful for. I just think it's better to get your eyes up, get your eyes on Jesus, get your eyes on the kingdom. Thank him for the students that were saved at camp. Thank him for all kinds of things that he's doing in the world for his glory. Supplication, quickly, I just want to really sharpen prayers of supplication. Our tendency is to say, that guy doesn't have a job, get him a job. That lady's sick, make her well. That, Our tendency is, Jesus, take everything that's kind of a problem or doesn't look great and just fix it and make it better. That is not careful praying. If Granny has cancer, my automatic prayer is not, God, make my Granny well. What if in her cancer, she is finding an intimacy with Jesus that she's never known before? What if medical personnel coming into her room are consistently hearing simple testimonies from her that's touching their hearts? We have no idea what the king is up to. So your first prayer always is, Lord Jesus, in the midst of this terrible situation, would you draw attention to yourself? Would you receive glory? While Jim Bob has no job, would you do things in this family that could not be done any other way? Would you lift hearts and eyes to you? Then your last prayer is, Lord Jesus, you've given me permission to express the desire of my heart. I can't know everything that you're doing. It just seems to me that it would be a wonderful thing that my grandmother didn't die of cancer. So by your miraculous hand, would you make her well? I think that's a perfectly fine prayer. It's just the last prayer. Primarily, I'm taking all of these hard situations and I'm praying for God to receive glory out of that, for the kingdom to come more on the earth. After you begin praying in a fuller, deeper, richer way, a suggestion I would make for a Wednesday night is make a little living room set up in front of the students. Headset mic. What you might do is just sit in a dark room with a lamp on and let the students hear you do your morning worship. Just, obviously you do it verbally, but just pray the way you pray through the morning. Most of them have no clue what that kind of extended prayer would look like. They can't picture that. So let them watch yours, and I'll bet there will be several students the very next morning that will pray deeper, richer prayers because of having observed you do that. Okay, those are my thoughts about morning prayer.
Oh my goodness, there was so much there, so much gold there. That was so. I grinned when you mentioned the Acts prayer. That's something that I've been using for probably 5 years now for my middle school students. It started with, we would transition them. We would be combined for worship with middle school and high school, and then our middle school would go to a separate room for Bible study. And so they would be goofy and silly, moving from place to place. So I needed something to calm them down, and so I just said, well, let's pray. And then so I said, okay, well, I have this time of prayer built in, but let's build a model. And so Acts prayer is what I found. And so I've been walking them through at least once a month, Acts prayer, specifically to give them a model if they've never had anything or never been modeled to pray. So the one thing so I'm really familiar with it, and I communicate it often to students. And so the one that really stuck out to me that was Thanksgiving, because my little saying that I always do is, what if you woke up this morning with everything that you thank God for yesterday? And for most of us, that's nothing, because we don't thank God for things, and I do probably lean more on the things side. I've not really ever thought of it as in the thanking him, saying it to students. I know my personal life I do, but saying it to students, thanking him for salvations at D Now, thanking him for salvations at camp, thanking him for all the things that he's doing in your class on that student you're sharing the gospel with. I've never thought about it, communicating it like that to students. So I think that's helped me. So thank you for that. I don't know if that even makes sense in my rambling, but that was for me. That was really good. Anyway, that was so much good there. The second question I wanted to ask you is, how did you know that you were called to ministry specifically? And then when did you know that student ministry was where you're going to be for life? Because I think most guys, maybe when they get into student ministry, especially in the last few years, they may even think, man, I'm just going to do this forever. How did you know that that was for sure for you and that you weren't being called to something else?
In terms of initial call to ministry, I was about 11, and I can't pull up a lot of those 11-year-old memories. I just know,
Mm-hmm.
even in worship service, gripping the back of the pew in front of me during altar calls and whatnot, I just sensed the Holy Spirit of God saying, I want you to do ministry, but I want you to do ministry as your vocation. That's we're obviously all called to the ministry, but the twist there was, I want you to do ministry as your vocation. Uh, and I went to back in the day, we often went to the front of the church to tell the congregation, hey, I'm sensing a call to vocational ministry. And I wish we could come back to that. Shane Pruitt and I both wish that could become the practice of the church again, because I think it's exceptionally meaningful to younger people to stand before the church and say, this is what God is saying to me, because it brings the entire church around you. More people pray for you, more people encourage you. But anyway, for me, that was just a very meaningful time. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
my dad was pastoring smaller churches, so I never saw a living, breathing, full-time youth minister. So I really didn't know to say that, or I don't even know if I could have said that. I just knew I was to do God's work, and that was to be my job. It was really my freshman year of college that a BSM director just took me under his wing and began to say, Richard, I just sense in you that you could love young people, you could be a minister to them. And it was in that freshman year that I became a youth minister. So really, it was an individual that God used to help interpret that call. In terms of when did I figure out that was going to be a lifetime, I don't know that there was ever a time that I just thought, oh, okay, I'm going to be this really ancient senior citizen still working in youth ministry. It's just whatever I was doing, I couldn't see an end to that. I couldn't see an end to being in youth ministry. And it never occurred to me. It's not common, I guess, for youth leaders to get a PhD, but in that PhD, it was not, oh, okay, quietly, we're going to begin to ramp up for this other thing we're going to do.
Yeah.
I just always felt like I was going to be somehow related to youth ministry. I guess kind of a pivotal part was in 2000 coming to Southwestern. I had to reaffirm, out of all the teaching fields in a seminary, what's my passion? What do I want to stand in front of a class and do every day? And of course, slam dunk, it's got to be youth ministry. So I think probably at that point, I couldn't even imagine making any kind of shift or a change. And I'm still teaching today, and I guess in some bizarre universe, I could shift focus now, but I have no interest in that whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
I literally get up every morning excited about being a part of the student ministry world. I'm thinking thoughts related to the student ministry world. And I think, certainly, the vast majority of student ministers do not drift, that they are called into other church vocations. I applaud that. I have no problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're blessed if God just allows you to stay in student ministry a long, long time. And now we're finally figuring out that mom and dad are the most important influence in the lives of teenagers. Well, who does the best building into them? People that are closer to them in age. And we're figuring out that student ministry volunteers are massively important, or could be, to the spiritual development of teenagers. Well, who does the best job? Those that are closest to them in age. So you're not getting worse. You're getting actually better by staying in student ministry for a while. So I just applaud any of those that are open to that longer calling.
So this is just a follow-up question. So I just graduated with my doctorate. As you said, there's not many people in student ministry that have that type of degree. And so just people even within my church are asking, all right, well, what's next? What are you going to do now? I was like, well, student ministry. that's what I want to do. And they're like, well, one lady, and she meant really well by it. She didn't mean mean, but she just said, you're going to do real ministry one day, and you're going to do so good. She was trying to be complimentary to me, but like I quickly was like, well, I'm doing real ministry right now. Like middle school is so pivotal because if they can get their faith in middle school, and I went through my whole spiel on like why middle school ministry is important, why student ministry is important. But how do we shift that view in the church that this isn't a stepping stone ministry? This isn't we're prepping you to be a pastor ministry. This is a ministry. It's something that we're serving now, doing impact now. I don't know how we shift that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, number one, people that think student ministry is simply a stepping stone, the first thing they need is a conversion experience. They need to meet Jesus. And if they are converted, then that's absolutely going to help their mental perspectives. But maybe what we need to do a better job is talking about, even in the culture, if you can get an adult to think, what actually shapes the direction of a society? What actually shapes the direction of a culture? It's young generation. That's where change happens. College campuses are in the spotlight right now. We've got lots of riots and demonstrations and all of that sort of thing. But that ferments change in the culture. It leads to shifts. Well, how did those 20-year-olds begin to think the way they're thinking? Where did they get their worldview? Where did they get their political perspective? They got all that when they were teenagers. Mm-hmm. We really are shaping the future of the world by shaping the next generation. Adults, yes, change can take place. I believe in that. God bless people that are called to work with adults. But the possibility of change is with the young. Probably we're still trying to get over that era, unfortunately, that we came through where everybody thought we were just the guy with the whistle around his neck, giving Kool-Aid to teenagers and playing volleyball behind the church. Those are pieces of student ministry. They're not very important pieces of student ministry, but the fact that in the past we were associated with that, I think we're still trying to get over it. So I think lovingly, gently helping adults see the possibility not only of individual life change and transformation, but cultural transformation by being involved with teenagers, it just makes sense. Obviously, increasingly people don't know Billy Graham's name, but I still find it fascinating how clearly he articulated in some of his writings, whomever captures the heart of the young will change a society, will change a nation, ultimately will change a world. And he even goes through history. The Red Guard in China, that was youth-driven. Castro's revolution in Cuba, that was youth-driven. Hitler's Germany, in many ways, Hitler Youth Organization was a major piece in building support for him in the country. So I would just say we're doing something that matters, and we're doing something that matters a lot.
So, and I'm sorry, I keep going off on questions that weren't prepared, but this was something I've thought about and I wanted to ask you too now. So student ministers 20 years ago, if you were a 19, 20, 21-year-old person, you were going into ministry, you probably didn't have a ton of options besides youth ministry. That was kind of the gateway into ministry. Now, if you're 21, 22, you feel called to be a pastor, you can plant a church, there's options now for you to do that. So because of that, there is a shortage of student pastors, I think we know, in our country. But do you think the quality of student pastor has went up? Because if someone is in student ministry, they want to be in student ministry. Do you agree with that assessment, maybe?
I do. I agree with the part that probably we have a higher percentage of youth ministers that are feeling a specific call to youth ministry, as opposed to I have a specific call to pastor a church. I can't get one of those churches right now, so I've got to pay my dues so I can do that later. Yes, I probably would agree with that. To say, is the quality of the student minister today better than before? The factor we just discussed, I think, would say yes. I do have a concern, though, that very, very young student ministers now are showing more of an inclination to just start doing that without really thinking carefully about study and preparation. We're just discovering tons of people that would say, I know I've never really been in a classroom where we were working on student ministry. I'm just trying to figure it out as I go. A guy that says, architecture fascinates me. I think it's a fascinating field. I actually think I can draw things that are interesting. Therefore, I'm just going to be a really good architect, but I'm not going to study the discipline of architecture. I think we all know how that's going to turn out. Buildings are going to fall down and bridges are going to collapse. I think the perspective that I don't need to study and prepare for student ministry harkens back to how hard can it be to order the right number of pizzas and come up with a great skit for Wednesday night. If we really believe we're in the business of transforming lives, if we really believe we're shaping a generation, if we really believe changing the homes where the teenagers live is central to raising up a generation to change the world, those are hard things. Those aren't easy things. If we really believe I am the leader, I'm the pastor of the volunteers in student ministry, therefore I have to pastor them really well, and I have to equip them to be totally competent in their work with teenagers. You don't just pick that up by reading one article or a blog or something. So, I'm sure some people listening to me would say, well, yeah, you teach student ministry, so obviously you think that. Those are true statements, but I think a person that really is watching and paying attention would say those that pay the price, do the study, are going to lead a more solid student ministry. And of course, now that doesn't necessarily mean I've got to move to a town with a seminary or whatnot. Now, the online options are so rich and so varied, people can do that and stay right in the middle of what they're doing in ministry.
Yeah, and I second that. My master's and my doctorate was all, I stayed here on campus, in Houghton. Didn't go to New Orleans, but I did all online, and it was so good and so helpful for me. Anyway, sorry to take us on that tangent. Those were both, that was so good for me. I really enjoyed both of those. So we'll move on to question number 3. With a long, successful career in student ministry, was it ever difficult? I'm sure it was, maybe, to balance family and ministry. And if so, what are some guidelines that you found helpful to maintain that balance?
Obviously, every day for every leader, that is a struggle. We do have a few lazy student pastors. We just do. I pray as they're converted and they meet Jesus face to face, I pray they won't be lazy anymore. People's lives are at stake. But really, the vast majority of people in student ministry are dying on the other end. It's that 60, 70, 80-hour work week that's just pulling people completely out of balance. In class, this is one guideline I would give. In class, I often say, if you can get more than this, praise God. If you can get more than this, but absolute minimum, 2 weeknight evenings at home and a full Saturday or the equivalent of a full Saturday off, absolute minimum. Now, once again, I don't think that is the ideal. I think if you get more evenings than that, great. But I just know in church life, things happen, and it's not just our stuff. We're supposed to show up for other people's stuff. I know all about that. So, but I think a spouse can keep from filing divorce papers if they know, I'm going to get your full and undivided attention 2 nights a week. We're really going to do things as a family, and we're going to get this completely open and free Saturday to just do all kinds of interesting things. Obviously, lots of student ministry things happen on Saturday. So I think in that regard, you're taking another day and you're saying, this is my Saturday. I would say a church that categorically would not allow a staff member to have 2 free evenings and a Saturday or the equivalent of a Saturday, I think you just start praying, God, would you have me transition to another place? I'm going to listen to you only, but you just tell me if you want me someplace where I can keep my family healthier. Now, what about those free moments? I know this is countercultural, but what I believe is that if you've got 2 free evenings and a Saturday, you are not accessible to people in your ministry world apart from life-threatening issues. Obviously, if a teenager is about to commit suicide, whatnot, if a girl has just discovered she's pregnant and her family is throwing things around the house, that's what pastors do. We just drop everything and we go. But the technology, of course, is the big issue here. I just think you train your people. You just say, Tuesday night, Thursday night are my family nights. Basically, I'm going to turn my phone and other technology off those evenings. I may check messages right before I jump to bed. That way I'll know if there's a crisis that needs my attention. But otherwise, if you text me, if you call me, you just need to know I'm going to respond to that the next day. You just train people. And I know most people think if somebody at church texted me in the evening and they're asking me a question, they're going to be mad at me if I don't answer right then. I just think you train people and you just say, listen, I'm giving so much of my time and my focus to the church and its ministry. I've got to protect this. I think if you really give spouses permission to express their opinion, I think lots of spouses would say, when I finally get this person at home, it bugs me that I'm losing attention and I'm losing focus because of that constant accessibility. And it's not just, oh, sweetheart, it'll only take me 60 seconds to text a reply. It's not just that. I get pulled back into that concern. I get pulled back into this person that's mad at me at church. It affects things. And I think that's why it frustrates a spouse not to have our undivided attention. So those are just my thoughts that might be helpful to somebody.
No, that's great. I've never heard it broke down like you said, 2 weeknights and a Saturday. Yeah, that's great. And I know I fall into not that I want to be accessible if a family needs me, but like I fall into that trap of, I want to be able to respond immediately. When someone has a question, I want to be respond. And so that was convicting to me to when I'm home. And I've done better about when I'm home for my kids and my wife. I want to be there. But yeah, that's something I probably need to work on too. Put the phone away.
Let me just add this because I want to just say, and what I've also watched a lot of student ministers do on that Saturday or the equivalent of the Saturday. Let's just say you've got a big event on Saturday, so you're going to take Thursday off or something. Yes. Lots of times I will hear youth ministers sheepishly tell me, well, yes, I got Thursday off, but I left a couple of things hanging in the office, so I just ran by for a few minutes. It's a mistake because, once again, it's not just the minutes that I took to go run by the church. It is I get pulled back into the tension and the stress and the focus on all that stuff, and I'm not being refreshed. I'm not being refreshed because my spirit just gets sucked back into that ministry world. And I think what we really need is undisturbed hours where we're getting healthy again and we're getting refreshed. And the church gets the benefit. Yeah, it doesn't help the church that I ran by the church on Thursday and knocked out 1, 2, 3. What they need is somebody that's fresh and excited and positive and looking forward to ministry. And I think that's going to come better if you stay consistent with those rhythms of time for yourself and your family.
That's great words of wisdom there. We'll move to the fourth question. If a student is feeling a call to ministry, and we kind of addressed that maybe just a little bit ago, you and Shane Pruitt. Shane Pruitt, if you don't know, if anybody's listening, has a book called Calling Out the Called. It's a great resource on calling out students. But if a student is feeling called to ministry in middle school, for example, what steps would you walk them through or help them decipher their call and help build them up so we can send them out into ministry?
Beyond what's in the book, which is a really, really wonderful book, just one thought I would say is always have something for that teenager to read. all the way through middle school, all the way through high school. Obviously, the younger they are, the simpler the book needs to be. But I think you're always putting something in their hand. And for them to be motivated to read that book, you need to go through that with them. So what you're disciplining yourself to do is, I'm going to scan that book, or I'm going to scan that chapter myself, because I always want to be able to say, what did you think about, or was it insightful for you when? In my own life, I know that when I read powerful thoughts in a book, it just opened my mind. It just made me think new things. So it could be whatever you want to call theology. It could be about the Christian life. It could be about doctrine, about truth. It could be apologetics. It could be all kinds of stuff. It doesn't have to be germane specifically to their ministry direction or call. I think you just keep them growing. And obviously, it goes without saying, always they have some opportunity for one-on-one discipleship. And if a student pastor says, I absolutely cannot get to that, then I think you find an adult who can do that, and they intentionally, one-on-one, are taking them through a discipleship process. Another just interesting thought, when they get up into high school, some student ministers have never thought about this. Some schools have whatever you call it, a work-study program, distributive education, different things like that. It took me a while to figure that out. And finally, I discovered I could get a student out of school, maybe the last period or 2 periods of the day, and they could come work with me just like they could go to a place of business and whatnot. And I had some teenagers that had success at that. They just made a case with whoever led that program and say, listen, my vocation is going to be working in churches and whatnot. So my internship, my vocational preparation needs to be in a church. And so that's just another option for a youth pastor to say, what if I had 1 or 2 juniors or seniors that were literally coming here in the late afternoon, mirroring me, going with me, watching how we do things here. That's just a thought. You can, not only can you invest in them, they can be a big help to you because they can perform tasks. They can do things that are helpful in ministry. Last thought is, and of course there's nothing new about this thought, but if a student is developing a vocational direction, you can try to do that very same thing with one of the other pastors that does reflect their ministry direction. And even if they can't get early release, just to say, could this student go to the hospital with you? Could this student one time sit and watch you construct a sermon? Could they one time watch how you train leaders here in the church? In other words, you're trying to help open a door for that teenager to mirror and just walk around and watch that. For a lot of young people, that would put them light years ahead in being able to really visualize what God is calling them to do.
And that was true for me. My student pastor, Scott Sullivan, took me with him on different trips to, like, if he was speaking at a D Now that was 30 minutes away, I would get to ride with him and go hear him preach, give an invitation, interact with kids afterward. And I didn't even know I was called to ministry at that time. Scott probably saw that in me more than I did. But once I surrendered to ministry, I was like, man, I have this whole bank of information that I didn't even realize I needed. And that because Scott brought me along on those hospital visits, on all those things, I had that built up in me. So yeah, as a student pastor, you may see a call on a student's life even before they do. Yeah, doing those things, bringing them alongside is massive, more than they may even realize. So I completely agree.
Brian Hall was a student pastor in Austin for decades and decades, and he was famous for doing that exact same thing. I speak at youth ministry conferences everywhere, and it was not uncommon at all for Brian to walk up at any student ministry conference and say, hey, Richard, I want you to meet so-and-so in my student group. He would always have 1 or 2 or 3 boys, just because of the travel, generally boys, but he would just take those guys with him, not the same ones. He just always was taking, and as he was reaching, senior adult ages, he would tell me all these people that were out there serving in ministry, and he just attributed a lot of that to the fact that he kept nurturing them and giving them these early experiences that ended up being life transforming.
Yeah, because most people's perception of what youth ministry or ministry is probably not true. They don't get to see all the things that we do, probably behind the scenes, or things that we do as a minister. And so that opens up their eyes to be like, okay, I can do that. That is something that I can see myself doing. And so, yeah, I think it does make a huge difference in students' lives. And we'll wrap up with this because I could talk to you all day. This has this has been fun. So the fifth one is, and it's kind of the most important question, or one of the most for student pastors right now, is how do we equip families to lead their own students through Deuteronomy 6 discipleship, whether that's family worship at home, family Bible studies. I know we all know the parents are the primary disciplers, but there's just a generation now that parents aren't picking up that baton. How do we equip them to do that?
Several levels. One piece of that is creating heart connections between parents and teenagers. That is not a small matter. It's not a peripheral matter. The way teenagers are made, if they're not close to mom and dad, worst case, if they hate mom and dad, or at the very least, if there's a lot of tension in the house, people are cool toward each other, people are distant toward each other, I don't think hardly anything is going to happen between the generations spiritually. You can scare a kid and say, you sit down on that couch and I'm going to read you the Bible. I just don't think it matters. So part of what you do in youth ministry is you're trying to warm up the relationship. Now, part of that is teaching. You've got a room full of parents and you're talking to them about how to rebuild closeness, how to rebuild relationships. But part of it is, I think you create events where that happens. And some of it can be just light. Let's just have fun. Let's just have parents and teenagers in a room having a blast. And you just take the creativity you use every day in student ministry, say, could I tweak that game where it would work well with both generations? Could I tweak that outdoor activity where it would just let people have fun? But I think you also do some things that are much more intentional. You probably know almost every Sunday I'm speaking to parents during the Bible teaching hour and then preaching to parents during the sermon time. But at noon, what I do in almost every church is after we eat something fast, I put parents and teenagers literally knee to knee facing each other. And for about 50 minutes, I'm telling them what to say to each other back and forth. We start light and then it just goes deeper, deeper, deeper. And really what's happening in those moments, the heart connection is coming back. And there's tears every week. There's tears across the room. They're forgiving each other. They're rebuilding relationships with each other. Lots of hugs. And I know those families can't go in the house the same way. They can't go in the house the same. And because of that, warmth has come flooding back. Now, if mom and dad talk to me about spiritual things, I'm open to that. Now it actually makes an impact. So the first issue is work on the heart connection. Second issue is mom and dad cannot picture exactly what you're asking them to do in terms of spiritual leadership because their mom and dad didn't do that with them. We've got a second generation here that they have no frame of reference. So if you stand in the pulpit and shake a bony finger at them and tell them you ought to do something, you've got to, at the same time, show them how. So here's my specific guidance. Whatever you're wanting the parents to do, you demonstrate it. Demonstrate it. If you're going to have a parent conference, create a living room scene, get a couch, get a chair, something, and you say, okay, I want to talk with you about how do you have a spiritual conversation with a teenager. And you put a family up there, maybe you practice ahead of time, but you're showing them how to do what you want them to do. If you're wanting them to have spiritual conversations as you walk in the way, put 6 folding chairs at the front of the room and make a minivan out of it and say, okay, how can you use drive time to and from school, to and from soccer? How can you use that for a kingdom purpose? I want to show you how you can informally have interesting conversations like that. So mom and dad go home and they go, okay, that's not rocket science. I can do that.
Yeah.
As opposed to, the pastors scream at me and I never have any idea what I'm supposed to do. So I think that can help. The last thing I want to say, though, is mom and dad can only give away what they already possess spiritually. So part of what you do at staff meeting, you're always saying to the other pastors, what can we do to more significantly disciple the adults in our church, primarily the parents? Because if we get better at discipling parents, spiritually, they're going to be better prepared to give something to their kids. Mm-hmm. Now, in addition to you just raising the issue with the full church, you do stuff in student ministry as well. You do a parent and youth retreat. Yes, you want it to bless the kids, but the method of your madness could be, I want mom and dad to go new places in Jesus. I want them to have a Friday night, late night worship experience that touches their hearts, because my teenagers are going to be the recipient of that. So that's enough for this time.
Well, Dr. Ross, thank you so much on all of that. This just top to bottom, all those questions were so well answered, and I'm looking forward to being able to share clips of this with people so they can see it and learn. And so, again, thank you so much for giving up some time to be here today.
It's been a joy being with you. God bless.
Thank you. And as we close, if this is your first time listening to the Picking Your Brain podcast, we drop episodes every Monday. We are starting season 3. So for the next 10 weeks, we'll have new episodes every Monday. Make sure you check it out and don't miss the next episode. We'll catch y'all next time.